For years, a cold and distant billionaire believed his autistic son had no future. Doctors told him the boy was incapable, and he never questioned it. The child lived locked away, ignored, treated like a problem. But everything changed the day a humble maid entered their lives. She didn't have a degree, just a heart. She saw what no one else saw. She listened, she paid attention, she believed in him. And one simple game of chess revealed a truth too powerful to ignore. When the father finally witnessed what his son could truly do, what had been hidden all along, he didn't just feel pride. He broke down in tears. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Charles Bennett was a man who built his life around business success and strict routines. He was extremely rich, powerful, and known for being cold and focused only on results. After the death of his wife, Charles changed even more. He stopped paying attention to anything that wasn't related to his companies or financial goals. His 7-year-old son, Oliver, was completely ignored. Oliver was born with autism and Down syndrome. Even though the boy could speak and express himself in simple ways, Charles didn't try to understand him. He hired a private medical clinic to evaluate the child. They said Oliver had no meaningful cognitive potential. Charles didn't question the diagnosis. He accepted it as truth, just like a business report. From that moment, he saw Oliver as a problem, not a person. Instead of being a father, he became a manager of his son's life, focused only on control and efficiency without care or love. After the evaluation, Charles decided to isolate Oliver in a separate wing of their massive mansion. This area became the boy's whole world. It had some toys, crayons, and basic furniture, but it felt empty. There was no joy or human warmth. Oliver was surrounded by walls, not people. He wasn't allowed to leave that part of the house, and he rarely saw anyone other than the caregivers. Charles changed these caregivers every week, like rotating employees in a company. None of them stayed long enough to bond with Oliver or understand his needs. The boy never had a consistent face to talk to, play with, or even just sit beside. He lived in quiet routines, not because they were comforting, but because they were all he had. Charles never visited, never asked how his son was doing, and never showed signs of concern. To him, Oliver's life was just another task on a long checklist. The caregivers followed strict instructions. They were not allowed to hug Oliver or show affection. Their job was only to keep him clean, safe, and out of the way. They didn't talk much, and when they did, it was often short and without emotion. Oliver wasn't violent or difficult, but he was silent most of the time. He played with the same toys, drew with the same crayons, and sat in the same spots day after day. He never asked for more because he had learned there was no one to ask. Sometimes he looked through the windows, watching the outside world he couldn't reach, but most of the time he stayed quiet, listening and watching. Although people thought he wasn't aware of much, Oliver noticed everything. He remembered faces, sounds, and movements. He wasn't as disconnected as people believed. He was just hidden, misunderstood, and left behind by a father who didn't try to understand him. Inside the mansion, Charles kept his life organized and separate from anything emotional. He had meetings, made investments, and traveled often. He didn't speak Oliver's name. The staff was told not to mention the boy unless there was a problem, and since problems were managed quickly and quietly, Charles rarely heard anything about his son. To him, silence meant things were going smoothly. He didn't know what Oliver liked, feared, or needed. He didn't know what games he played or what drawings he made. He didn't ask. In Charles's mind, showing interest in Oliver would distract him from more important goals. He believed he had already done his part by paying for the best clinic and hiring professional help. He thought this made him a responsible father. In truth, he had abandoned Oliver emotionally and physically, choosing distance over connection and control over care. Oliver, despite being alone, had created his own small world. He gave names to his toys, made stories in his head, and drew pictures that only he understood. He had a soft, stuffed animal that he never let go of, and he liked to line up his toy cars in perfect rows. Each day was similar to the one before, but he noticed small changes: a new caregiver, a different meal, a new sound in the hallway. He listened carefully when the staff talked, even when they didn't think he was paying attention. Oliver understood more than people assumed. He knew he was alone, and he knew that his father never came. He didn't cry or complain because he had no one to cry to. Instead, he became observant, quiet, and patient. He learned how to live in the silence and find small pieces of comfort in routines that others thought were meaningless. Despite everything, Oliver never gave up trying to understand the world around him. When he drew, he used colors to express things he couldn't say with words. He would sometimes stop and listen at the door when footsteps passed, hoping for someone new, someone kind. He learned the names of the workers by hearing them talk to each other, even if they never told him directly. Oliver remembered the sound of voices, the rhythm of people walking, and even the way they opened doors. He watched every detail, storing it in his mind. People assumed he wasn't paying attention, but he was. He was always aware, always watching. The world didn't understand Oliver, and Charles didn't even try. But Oliver never stopped looking, listening, and waiting for something to change, even if he didn't know what that change could be. And so, he continued his days in silence, surrounded by toys, drawings, and the quiet moments only he noticed. Lena Foster was hired suddenly and without much explanation. She wasn't given a full interview or a detailed list of duties. All she knew was that her job was to clean the east wing of a large mansion. That area was quiet and mostly cut off from the rest of the house. When Lena asked questions during her first day, she received short answers. No one seemed interested in explaining much. She was told not to bother anyone and to focus on her cleaning tasks. Lena wasn't a therapist, a nurse, or a specialist. She had worked cleaning offices and houses before, but never in a place this big or this strange. On her first day in the wing, she noticed how silent everything was. There were toys on the floor, drawings on the walls, and signs that a child lived there, but she didn't see any other staff around. Just a boy sitting on the floor, alone and quiet. The boy's name was Oliver. Lena saw it on a label stuck to one of his toy boxes. He was about 7 years old, with soft features and wide eyes that followed her every move. He didn't speak at first, just watched as she swept the floor and wiped down surfaces. Lena greeted him like she would greet any child. "Hi there," she said simply, smiling. Oliver didn't respond, but he didn't look away. Unlike the other staff members she passed in the hallway, Lena didn't act like he was a problem. She didn't avoid eye contact or treat him like he was invisible. She didn't try to apply any behavior rules or medical terms. She was just herself, simple, calm, and kind. As she moved around the room, she talked to Oliver the way she would talk to any child. She told him what she was doing, commented on his toys, and sometimes made light jokes. She didn't expect a reply. Over the next few days, Lena noticed something that no one had warned her about. Oliver started following her around. When she moved her cleaning cart down the hallway, he would walk behind it at a small distance. He didn't touch anything or get in the way, he just wanted to be close. When she used the vacuum, he copied the sound with his mouth. When she opened the window, he opened his hands. Lena found this fascinating. No one had told her that Oliver spoke or reacted. She started talking a little more while she worked. She made silly noises, repeated her actions slowly, and looked back often to see if he was still following. Oliver began to imitate small gestures, touching his head when she adjusted her hat, clapping softly when she closed a door. Lena didn't call it therapy. She didn't think in those terms. She just saw a boy who wanted to connect in the only way he knew how. Lena never tried to push Oliver to speak or act a certain way. She didn't ask him questions or try to test his knowledge. Instead, she made sure he felt safe and noticed. When she wiped the tables, she let him help by handing her the cloth. When she picked up toys, she let him watch closely. She never rushed. If Oliver sat near her quietly, she let him stay. If he walked away, she let him go. Over time, Oliver began to show more signs of comfort. He started repeating short words she used like clean, good, and done. His voice was soft but clear. Lena was always patient. She nodded and smiled, giving him space to try again if he wanted. One day when she finished cleaning and said, "See you tomorrow," Oliver repeated the phrase back. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was the first time Lena saw him smile with his whole face, and she smiled right back. Every morning, Oliver waited near the hallway where Lena would arrive. He would peek around the corner, listening for her cart's wheels. When he saw her, he'd walk beside her, sometimes holding a toy or pointing to something in his drawings. Lena learned that he liked certain colors, especially red and yellow. She noticed that he liked songs with simple rhythms, so she sometimes hummed while she worked. Oliver started responding with little dances or claps. Lena also realized that he remembered routines. If she skipped a step or forgot to say a word she usually said, Oliver would point or speak to remind her. These weren't just random reactions. They were part of his way of building a connection. Lena never praised him like a teacher or gave him rewards. She just smiled, talked, and treated him like he mattered. For the first time in a long while, Oliver wasn't just existing. He was engaging with someone who saw him as a person. In only a few weeks, Oliver changed in small but powerful ways. He smiled more often and made more sounds. He tried to repeat full phrases and stayed near Lena whenever she was around. The difference was clear, even if no one else paid attention. Lena didn't tell anyone. She didn't think it was her place. But she kept showing up every day, speaking with the same gentle tone, and including Oliver in whatever small tasks she had. What made the connection special was that Lena didn't follow a plan or try to fix anything. She didn't see Oliver as broken. She simply treated him like a child who wanted company and attention. That was enough to change everything. While others ignored Oliver or followed cold instructions, Lena saw the truth. He was aware, he was curious, and he was capable of forming bonds. And so, day after day, Oliver looked for her, waited for her, and smiled when she arrived. While cleaning a dusty cabinet in the corner of Oliver's living area, Lena came across something unexpected. An old chessboard with wooden pieces. The board was scratched and the pieces were mixed up, but it was complete. Without thinking much, Lena wiped it down and started placing the pieces in their proper positions, just out of habit. She didn't think Oliver would even notice. After setting it up, she left it on the table and continued her cleaning. That day, Oliver had stayed quiet, watching her from a distance, as usual. He looked at the board briefly, but didn't approach it. Lena didn't force anything. She treated it like just another object in the room. She left the board as it was and went home when her shift ended. The next day, when she returned, something surprising had happened. Oliver was already sitting at the table, staring at the board, with the white pieces set up correctly and one pawn already moved. Lena walked slowly toward the table, unsure of what she was seeing. Oliver didn't look at her right away. He kept his eyes on the chessboard. Curious, Lena sat on the other side and looked at the board. The move made sense. It was the opening of a game. Without saying anything, Lena moved a black pawn in response. Oliver immediately picked up another piece and made a second move, still without speaking. His eyes stayed focused and his hands moved with precision. Lena played another move, testing him. Again, Oliver responded quickly and correctly. Within minutes, they were playing a real game of chess. Every move he made was logical and followed standard strategy. Lena didn't go easy on him, but he still won. She sat back in her chair, stunned. This wasn't luck. Oliver knew exactly what he was doing. He had never been taught by anyone here, and yet he played like someone who understood the rules deeply. The next day, Oliver was already waiting at the chessboard when Lena arrived. He had reset the pieces and was sitting in the same spot. This time he looked at her and pointed at the chair across from him. Lena smiled and sat down. They started a new game. Throughout the match, Lena tried different strategies. Oliver didn't just react. He planned ahead. He made bold moves, sometimes risky, but they worked. He wasn't just repeating learned behavior, he was thinking through each situation. Lena began talking a bit while they played. She named the pieces and explained moves aloud. Sometimes Oliver repeated the words. Other times he responded with short phrases like "your turn" or "check." These weren't just habits, they showed he was understanding the situation. Each time he won, he didn't celebrate, but Lena could see the quiet pride in his eyes. He knew what he had done, and he wanted to do it again. As the games continued, Lena became more convinced that something was wrong with the way others viewed Oliver. He was clearly intelligent. He paid attention. He remembered moves from previous games and used strategies that worked before. Lena realized that his autism and Down syndrome had caused people to underestimate him. They had assumed he couldn't learn or think strategically, so they never gave him the chance. But here he was, proving them wrong over and over again. Lena started to take notes after each game. She tried to track his style of play and reactions. Eventually, she took out her phone and started recording small videos, just a few seconds at a time. She wanted proof that Oliver was more than what they thought. She didn't plan to show the videos to anyone right away. She just wanted to keep a record of something she knew was important, something that could change how others saw him. In the recordings, Lena captured moments that felt impossible to ignore. Oliver not only played full games, but also predicted her moves. When Lena tried to trick him with confusing plays, he paused, studied the board, and responded with accuracy. His expressions were serious, focused, and calm. Sometimes he leaned back, thought for a few seconds, then made a move that completely shifted the game. Lena was careful not to praise him in a way that felt forced. Instead, she spoke to him like an equal, someone who had skill. She asked if he wanted to play again, and he would nod or point. Some days they played twice, sometimes even 3 or 4 times. Each time, his focus stayed strong. He never seemed tired or distracted. The chessboard had become more than a game. It was a bridge. Through it, Oliver was communicating, showing knowledge, and building confidence. Lena saw it clearly. The boy was gifted. Lena knew that what was happening couldn't be ignored for much longer. She saved all the recordings carefully, labeling them by date and noting each game result. She wasn't sure who to show first or how to explain everything, but she knew she couldn't stay silent. The diagnosis Oliver had received, the one that labeled him as having no relevant cognitive potential, was wrong. It wasn't just slightly off, it was completely false. Oliver had never been given the right chance to learn, express himself, or show what he understood. But with something as simple as a chessboard, everything had changed. Lena didn't have medical training, but she had eyes, ears, and patience. She saw what others missed. Oliver was smart, curious, and capable of deep thinking. As they finished another match, and Oliver reset the board for the next game, Lena turned on her phone once more. It was obvious now. Oliver understood the game, thought ahead, and knew exactly what he was doing. Lena had been feeling uneasy for a while. Something didn't make sense. Oliver was too sharp, too focused, and too aware for the diagnosis he had been given. She saw it in the way he played chess, followed instructions, and responded to new challenges. One afternoon, after finishing her cleaning tasks earlier than usual, Lena walked into the medical wing that was usually locked but left open that day. She looked around, not with any clear plan, but following a strong feeling. In a metal cabinet behind some old files, she found a stack of folders with Oliver's name on them. Curious, she opened them one by one until she found something that made her stop. 2 reports. 2 different evaluations of the same boy. One of them was from a neurologist with a well-known reputation in the medical field. The report was clear. Oliver had a strong logical profile and showed signs of high cognitive potential, especially in problem-solving situations. Right behind it, stapled to another document, was a second report. This one looked newer, printed on the letterhead of a private clinic. It stated the complete opposite. According to this document, Oliver had severe developmental delays, no ability to retain new information, and an irreversible cognitive condition. The language was cold and final. Lena read it twice to make sure she wasn't misunderstanding. She went back to the first report and compared the 2. The dates were only 3 weeks apart. The neurologist's report had come first and had been ignored. The second one, the negative one, had been stamped and marked as official. It was the version used to define Oliver's life. Lena looked for signatures and saw something else strange. The clinic that made the second report had ties to Charles's company. The clinic was partly funded by one of Charles's subsidiaries. Suddenly, it was clear to Lena that this was no accident. It had been done on purpose. Lena kept digging through the files and found internal memos and payment documents. It didn't take long to see that the clinic received government incentives and insurance payments for handling irreversible cases. There were mentions of permanent status validation and ongoing support programs. Basically, the worse the diagnosis, the more money the clinic could receive from public and private sources. Oliver's false report was not just a mistake, it was profitable. The company benefited from keeping him labeled as someone who could never improve. Lena sat on the floor, shocked by what she was reading. This wasn't about misunderstanding or caution. It was about money. They had taken a smart, capable child and locked him away under a fake label just to fit into a system that gave them financial gain. Lena looked at the first report again. It had no stamp, no follow-up, and had been buried under newer paperwork. She realized no one was supposed to see it again. The truth hit Lena hard. This wasn't a medical error or a disagreement between experts. It was a lie made intentionally to control Oliver's life and keep others from helping him. She thought back to the cold way Charles treated his son, the isolation, the rotating caregivers, the complete lack of emotional contact. It all made sense now. Charles didn't want to deal with the truth. Accepting Oliver's potential would require effort, attention, and change. It would mean therapy, school, and maybe even explaining to others why the first report was hidden. Ignoring the truth was easier. Paying a clinic to rewrite reality was simpler. It allowed Charles to turn Oliver into a project he didn't have to manage. Lena felt sick. She stood up and looked around the room, knowing that if she told someone, there would be consequences. But she also knew she couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't just about cleaning floors or playing chess. It was about justice. Lena made copies of the reports using the old scanner in the room. She saved them to a flash drive she carried in her bag. She took photos of the files with her phone, careful to include dates and signatures. She didn't know yet what she would do with them, but she couldn't let them disappear again. Later that evening, she sat in her small apartment and reviewed everything. The evidence was clear. The clinic, the funding, the fake diagnosis. It was all part of a system designed to keep Oliver labeled as hopeless. Lena looked through her videos again. She watched Oliver plan chess moves, smile when he succeeded, and repeat new words. None of it matched the second report. The child in the videos was bright, aware, and ready to learn. Lena felt angry, but also motivated. She didn't need permission to do what was right. She had the truth, and now she had proof. She started organizing everything carefully. She renamed the video files, added short explanations, and backed them up in multiple places. She printed out copies of both reports and placed them side by side in a folder. Lena knew she had to be careful. If Charles found out too early, he might make everything disappear again. But she also couldn't wait too long. Oliver deserved more. He deserved to be seen for who he really was, not hidden behind a lie that helped others make money. Lena began to write a simple report of her own, explaining what she had found, what she had seen, and why it mattered. She wasn't a doctor or a lawyer, but she had something stronger, the truth. As she stared at the documents one last time before locking them in her drawer, she understood the full weight of what had happened. This wasn't just a wrong diagnosis. It was a paid, deliberate lie. Lena had been thinking for days about how to help Oliver beyond the mansion walls. She had seen what he was capable of. His skills in chess weren't just good for a child with his condition, they were remarkable for any child his age. After some research, she found a non-profit organization that hosted chess tournaments for children in the city. It wasn't competitive in a harsh way. It was more about learning, fun, and giving kids a chance to grow. She saw a small form on the website for new players. It didn't ask much, just the name, age, and a contact. Lena used her own email and listed herself as a contact person. She didn't tell anyone. She knew the risks. The event was a few weeks away, so she and Oliver began to train in secret. They practiced in short sessions when no one was around. Oliver was excited and focused. Every day he seemed more confident. Lena used her lunch breaks and extra minutes to show Oliver different strategies. She taught him how to protect his queen, how to force checkmates in fewer moves, and how to notice his opponent's weaknesses. Oliver was fast. He didn't just memorize, he understood. He started creating patterns of his own and remembering moves from earlier games. Sometimes he would laugh and say, "Check," with a big smile. They kept the sessions quiet, always making sure not to attract attention. It became their little secret. Lena noticed how much happier Oliver seemed. He was more expressive, more talkative, and even showed signs of planning his days around the training. She promised him that one day soon he would play with other kids. That idea made him very happy. He asked questions about the event, about how many games he would play, and if there would be snacks. He was acting like any regular kid preparing for something exciting. But things changed suddenly. One afternoon, while they were in the middle of a match, Charles came in without warning. Lena didn't hear him coming. She was too focused on Oliver's moves, and so was the boy. Charles stood at the doorway and watched for a few seconds before speaking. Then, in a loud and angry voice, he asked what was going on. Lena stood up quickly, trying to explain that they were just playing a game. Charles didn't listen. He stepped into the room and began yelling. He accused Lena of manipulating Oliver, of pretending there was progress when there wasn't. He said she had no authority to teach or train the boy, and she had crossed the line. According to him, the boy didn't really understand what he was doing. He claimed Lena was confusing kindness with actual results. She tried to speak, but he cut her off. Without another word, he told her she was fired. Lena didn't argue. She knew Charles wouldn't listen. His mind was already made up. She gathered her things quickly and left the room. Oliver sat still, not understanding what was happening, but feeling that something was wrong. Lena didn't say goodbye directly. She was afraid it would make things worse. She walked out of the mansion quietly, holding back her frustration and sadness. That night, she stayed up late, wondering what would happen to Oliver now. She felt helpless. Everything they had built together, every word, every move, every little sign of progress was at risk of being erased. Charles would probably go back to ignoring the boy completely. The videos, the reports, the documents she had found still existed, but now she was cut off. She didn't know if she would ever see Oliver again. More than anything, she was heartbroken because she had seen hope in him, and now she had been taken away from him. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Oliver was quiet. He didn't play or move around much that evening. The caregivers noticed, but they didn't ask questions. To them, he was just going through one of his quiet days. But Oliver wasn't just quiet, he was sad. He didn't understand why Lena was gone, but he knew she wasn't coming back. He waited by the hallway at the usual time, but she never showed up. He looked at the empty chair across from the chessboard, and he knew she had been taken away. Slowly, he went to the cabinet and pulled out the chessboard by himself. He set it up carefully, just like she had taught him. He placed every piece in its correct position, one by one. Then he picked up the black queen and put it in the center of the board. That was their joke. When he beat her, he would always place the queen there and say something funny. He sat there quietly for a while. Then with a crayon, he took a small piece of paper and wrote a short message. "Bye, Mommy." It was something Lena had laughed at before, a playful phrase he used after winning a game. She would laugh and pretend to be shocked, saying, "What did you just call me?" And Oliver would smile even more. Now, he wrote it alone, not fully understanding the meaning of the words, but knowing it was something that connected them. The board was still in front of him, set up for another game that would never be played. The queen was in the middle, and the note sat next to it. It wasn't just a joke anymore. It was his way of saying goodbye. A simple phrase written with a crayon was the only thing he could do to express how much he missed her. And for that night, that was all he had. The weekend came quietly, and Charles had no plans to leave his home office. As usual, he spent his Saturday morning checking numbers, reading reports, and managing company affairs. He hadn't asked about Oliver all day. He assumed the boy was in his wing, playing with his toys or sitting in silence like always. At one point, he noticed the house was unusually quiet, even for him. The staff didn't seem to be around. The driver wasn't outside, and Oliver's area showed no signs of movement. Charles called one of the caregivers, but no one picked up. It wasn't long before his assistant nervously walked into the room and said something unexpected. "Sir, the driver took Oliver out. They went to a school gymnasium. It seems there's a chess tournament." Charles stood up quickly, confused and annoyed. "A what?" he asked. The assistant repeated it. "A chess tournament, sir, with children." Charles didn't believe it. He grabbed his keys and left immediately. Charles drove himself, something he rarely did. His mind raced. How could this happen? Who gave permission? Was Lena behind this, even after being fired? He was angry, but also curious. What kind of tournament would allow a boy like Oliver to participate? He imagined a group of children playing while Oliver sat quietly, not understanding the game. It felt like a setup. Still, he followed the directions and arrived at a public school building. It was simple, with a banner outside that read, "Youth Chess Invitational, Friendly Match Day." He parked and walked in quickly. The hallway was filled with parents, teachers, and children. Volunteers guided people to the gym, where the final rounds were being held. Charles stepped inside just as the announcer asked for silence. The room had several tables, but all eyes were on one match in the center. A boy with calm focus moved a piece forward. Oliver. Charles froze at the entrance. He had arrived at the exact moment of the final play. Oliver was seated confidently, facing another child. The board between them was full, but only a few pieces remained. The crowd watched in complete silence. Charles stepped aside, trying not to interrupt, and stared. He saw Oliver lean forward, hold his black queen, and place it in position. It was a checkmate, clean, simple, and perfect. The room erupted in applause. Some people smiled, a few stood up to clap louder. Oliver didn't flinch. He just smiled, then looked across the gym, past the crowd. His eyes found Lena, standing quietly near the back wall. She was not hiding, but also not trying to stand out. She smiled proudly. Then, in front of everyone, Oliver lifted the Queen and shouted the phrase that had once been just a game between them. "Bye, Mommy." His voice was loud and clear. The audience didn't understand the joke, but Lena laughed. Charles watched it all, his body stiff, his hands shaking slightly. Charles didn't know what to feel at first. He had come expecting to end something, maybe to pull Oliver away and scold whoever was responsible. But he didn't move. He stood there, shocked, staring at the son he thought he knew. Oliver wasn't confused or lost. He wasn't being led through the game by someone else. He wasn't repeating steps by memory. He had just played and won on his own. Charles had never seen him like this. He had never imagined Oliver could function like this in public, let alone win a chess match. For the first time, Charles realized that everything he believed might have been wrong. He felt something heavy in his chest. Oliver wasn't broken. He had been hidden, ignored, misunderstood, and Charles had been the one to accept that. He had accepted the false report, accepted the distance, and never looked deeper. Now, in front of dozens of strangers, he saw the truth. Charles walked slowly toward the side of the gym. He didn't want attention. He found an empty chair in the corner, away from everyone else, and sat down. For a long time, he didn't speak. He didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on Oliver, who was now talking quietly to one of the volunteers, smiling, holding his queen piece in his hand. Charles wiped his face once, pretending it was just sweat, but it wasn't. Then the tears came. He tried to stop them, but they didn't listen. He lowered his head and covered his eyes. He cried silently, shoulders shaking. No one said anything. No one came over. In that moment, Charles felt two things at once: pride and guilt. Pride in what his son had just done. Guilt for never trying to see it before. All the years of isolation, the cold decisions, the labels, none of it mattered now. Oliver had shown the world who he really was. Charles stayed in that chair for a while. He watched as other children came over to congratulate Oliver. Some gave him high fives. A parent asked for a photo. Oliver didn't seem afraid or confused. He handled it well, staying calm and happy. Lena stood quietly nearby, watching too. Charles looked at her and realized everything she had done. She hadn't given up, even after being dismissed. She had believed in Oliver when no one else did. He couldn't find the words to thank her, not yet, but he knew deep down that she had changed everything. When the event ended and Oliver was handed a small medal and certificate, he looked around again. He didn't seem surprised to see his father in the crowd. He just gave a small wave and smiled. Charles nodded back, eyes still red. That day had started as a confrontation, but it had ended with something else entirely. For the first time, Charles felt something real for his son: respect, love, and a deep, painful regret. After the chess tournament, news of Oliver's win spread faster than anyone expected. Some parents posted short videos online. A few blogs wrote about the unusual boy who had quietly outplayed everyone. It didn't take long for the clinic involved in Oliver's diagnosis to hear about it. Their response was immediate and defensive. They released a statement claiming that the situation had been misrepresented. According to them, Lena had manipulated Oliver for personal attention. They said she had spent months training him to memorize moves without understanding them. They even suggested the tournament organizers had been misled. At the same time, they contacted Charles directly. The message was clear: keep quiet, or they would expose old business deals that linked him to their operations. They reminded him of donations, contracts, and private support agreements signed under his company's name. For years, Charles had ignored those papers. Now, with everything happening, he finally started reading them carefully. Charles shut himself in his home office and brought out the documents that had sat untouched in drawers for years. The deeper he looked, the worse it became. The original neurologist's report, which had praised Oliver's logic and potential, was nowhere in the official files, completely erased from the system. In its place was the altered version written by the clinic, with words like irreversible and permanent cognitive delay repeated across multiple pages. Attached to those documents were contracts, donation agreements, and financial reports. One contract had a clause that stood out. It offered long-term funding to the clinic for every confirmed case labeled as non-recoverable. The more hopeless the case seemed, the more money the clinic received from the government, insurance companies, and sponsors, including Charles's own company. These weren't just medical evaluations, they were business opportunities. Charles felt sick. He realized he had been part of something much bigger and darker than he imagined. He hadn't just ignored his son, he had helped others do the same. He started digging further. With help from a legal advisor he trusted, Charles requested access to internal records from the clinic. It took effort, but eventually he found evidence that Oliver wasn't the only child affected. Dozens of children, possibly more, had been given the same kind of false evaluations. Most of them came from families who didn't have the money or power to question a clinic's authority. Their children had been labeled, separated from standard education, and placed into programs that did nothing for them. Charles saw the patterns clearly: rushed assessments, copy-paste language in reports, and families pushed towards special care options controlled by the same group of professionals. The documents showed that many of the children never received a second opinion. The clinic had built a quiet, profitable system by turning potential into diagnosis and diagnosis into money. Oliver had been just one more name on a long list. But this time, the lie had been exposed. Charles didn't wait. He gathered all the files, screenshots, and legal records into one large case folder. He reached out to a journalist he once worked with, someone known for publishing corporate investigations. They met privately, and Charles told the full story. He didn't leave anything out. He admitted his part in the silence, his ignorance, and his guilt. But now, he said, he wanted it corrected. He handed over documents showing the original medical report, video proof of Oliver's progress, and records that connected his company's funds to the clinic's programs. The journalist was shocked, not only by the story, but by how much proof Charles had collected. This wasn't just a scandal about one child. It was about a system built on silencing children who were different. Charles told the journalist that he didn't care about protecting his name anymore. He only cared about making sure people knew the truth, starting with Oliver's story. At the same time, Charles released a public statement. In it, he confessed to supporting an organization that had misled families and misdiagnosed children. He didn't make excuses. He called out the clinic by name and demanded a full investigation. He submitted his evidence to the health authorities and called for independent evaluations for all the children affected. The statement shocked the media. It wasn't common for a billionaire to admit fault, especially in such a public way. But Charles didn't stop there. He began funding an advocacy group to protect children with developmental conditions, making sure they had access to fair assessments and real educational opportunities. He offered scholarships and legal support to families who had been silenced. Most of all, he made it clear that Oliver's progress was real, not a trick or a fluke, but the result of being seen, respected, and supported. The lie had been big, but the truth was now louder. Charles knew this was just the beginning. Legal action was coming. The clinic would fight back, and there would be pressure from former business allies. But he was ready for it. He had lived too long behind walls, believing that numbers and results were all that mattered. Now he saw how much damage that thinking had caused. Oliver had been one of many children buried under labels, but somehow he had broken through with help, patience, and the right chance. Charles visited Oliver's room that night. He watched his son, who was asleep, holding the same Black Queen piece in his hand. It reminded him of the tournament, of the smile, of the phrase, "Bye, Mommy." It hurt, but it also gave him strength. This time, he wouldn't walk away. He would make sure Oliver and every child like him would never be erased again. The world would know the truth, and Charles would be the one to show it. Charles decided it was time to make everything public. He didn't want press releases prepared by lawyers or short interviews arranged by PR teams. He wanted to speak directly to everyone and tell the full story without edits or filters. He scheduled a press conference and invited every major news outlet. The event was set up in a conference room at one of his own company buildings, but this time it wasn't about business. It was personal. The room filled quickly. Journalists, photographers, TV crews, and some curious employees. Everyone expected something important, but no one knew exactly what he was about to reveal. When Charles walked onto the stage, he didn't wear a suit or tie. He looked tired, serious, and completely focused. He placed a folder on the podium, looked at the cameras, and started speaking. He didn't read a script. He just talked, calmly, clearly, and honestly, and then he told the entire truth from beginning to end. He began by explaining Oliver's original diagnosis and how he had accepted it without question. He admitted to isolating his son, trusting medical professionals, and assuming that Oliver would never be able to live or learn like other children. Then he paused, took a deep breath, and said, "I was wrong." The room went silent. He showed the original medical report, the one written by the neurologist who saw potential in Oliver. Then he showed the second report, issued by the clinic connected to his own company, which claimed his son was incapable of learning. Charles didn't hold back. He called out the clinic by name and displayed proof of their financial deals and incentives for labeling children as hopeless. Next, he played a video of Oliver at the chess tournament, focused and smiling, finishing a game with a clean checkmate. He looked at the cameras again and said, "My son was never the problem. The problem was the people who got paid to pretend he had no solution." News outlets broadcasted the footage nationwide. Social media exploded with clips of Charles's speech. But more importantly, something unexpected started happening. Other families came forward. Parents who had taken their children to the same clinic shared similar stories. Some had been told their children would never improve, never speak, never learn. A few had been pressured into putting their children in long-term care programs that led nowhere. The public outcry was immediate. Health officials launched an investigation. The clinic's offices were inspected and thousands of files were reviewed. Some doctors were suspended within days. Others lost their licenses completely. The media labeled it one of the biggest medical ethics scandals in recent memory. Journalists followed every update, and Charles continued to cooperate fully. He made it clear that he wasn't interested in protecting himself. He wanted justice for Oliver, for the other children, and for the truth that had been hidden for too long. As the investigation deepened, one name kept appearing in online discussions and news segments: Lena Foster. People wanted to hear from the woman who had seen what no one else did. She was invited to speak on several programs and was even offered interviews, but she refused most of them. Finally, at a small press panel organized by an education advocacy group, she agreed to speak briefly. When her turn came, she stepped up to the microphone and said only one thing: "I saw the boy. The rest of the world only saw a number." Then she stepped back and said nothing else. That simple sentence was quoted everywhere. It became the symbol of the whole case. People praised her for her honesty, her simplicity, and most of all, her courage. She had no title, no formal training, but she had done what professionals didn't. She looked at Oliver and treated him like a person. That made all the difference. Back at the main press conference, Charles ended his speech with something deeply personal. He turned to one of the cameras and spoke directly to his son, who was watching from home with a caregiver. He said, "Oliver, I'm sorry I didn't see you sooner. I'm sorry I didn't believe in you, but I see you now and I'm proud of you." The words weren't dramatic or rehearsed. They were real. After a moment of silence, he turned and looked at Lena, who stood quietly near the side of the room. He nodded and said, "And thank you to the woman who did what no one else had the courage to do. See?" The room was silent again, but this time it wasn't just shock, it was respect. People stood up, not because they were told to, but because they knew they had witnessed something rare. A public figure not defending himself, but admitting fault, showing emotion, and trying to make things right. In the weeks that followed, real change began. The investigation led to new policies in medical evaluations for children. Clinics were audited, and health boards set stricter standards for diagnosing developmental conditions. Charles used his influence and money to create a foundation focused on education, early diagnosis, and family support. He didn't name it after himself or his company. Instead, he named it after the first chess move Oliver ever made, E2 to E4. The foundation helped families access second opinions, funded inclusive education programs, and supported children who had been ignored for too long. Oliver continued playing chess, sometimes even at small public events. People recognized him, but he didn't seem bothered. He just played the game he loved. Charles sat beside him when he could, watching, learning, and slowly rebuilding the bond he once thought was impossible. And every time Oliver won and raised his queen in the air, he smiled. This time, the whole world was watching, and finally, it saw the truth. Charles didn't waste time after the public exposure of the clinic scandal. He felt the need to turn his guilt and regret into something that could help others. He took the first step by creating a non-profit organization called the Oliver Foundation. It was named after his son, not for attention or image, but because Oliver had become the symbol of everything that needed to change. The foundation's main goal was to ensure that all neurodivergent children received fair, accurate, and human-centered evaluations. Charles used his network to bring in ethical professionals, educators, therapists, and legal advisors. He wanted this to be a place where no child would ever be written off again. When asked who would lead the project on the ground, he didn't hesitate. He called Lena Foster. She accepted the role of general coordinator, not because of the title, but because she believed in the mission. She had seen what happened when a child is truly seen. Lena took the role seriously. She helped design programs, interview staff, and set the foundation's tone. She pushed for personalized evaluations that focused on strengths, not just challenges. Under her leadership, the foundation developed training for teachers, therapists, and caregivers, helping them understand how to truly observe and connect with neurodivergent children. Meanwhile, Oliver was finally placed in a school that offered adapted learning. It wasn't a place where he was treated as different. It was a place where being different was normal. The teachers were trained, patient, and open-minded. They didn't force Oliver into boxes. Rather, they allowed him to explore, learn, and grow at his own pace. Within a few months, his improvement was clear. He was participating more, smiling often, and showing interest in new subjects like logic puzzles and strategy games. For the first time, he came home with stories about his day, about classmates, about things he liked. He had never done that before. Chess remained a big part of Oliver's life. The foundation supported his participation in several friendly tournaments and local events that encouraged thinking and social interaction. Oliver didn't always win, but he never backed away from a challenge. He also joined a logic club at school, where he solved puzzles and learned how to explain his reasoning in front of others. This was something that once seemed impossible. His confidence grew with each small achievement. More importantly, he made friends, real friends, who liked him for who he was. His classmates didn't see him as the special kid. They just saw Oliver. One of his closest friends was a girl who also had autism. They often sat together during lunch and shared drawings or chess strategies. Seeing Oliver in this new environment made Lena emotional every time she visited. Charles came to every event, always sitting quietly, watching with pride. Slowly, the damage of the past was being replaced with real progress. As Oliver's story spread, more families began contacting the foundation. Parents who felt ignored by medical professionals. Teachers who wanted better tools to support their students. Even some former staff from the discredited clinic came forward, offering to help fix what had been broken. Charles ensured the foundation offered support to those families, whether it meant legal help, access to specialists, or just someone to listen. Oliver's name became more than a symbol. It became hope. He was invited to events, seminars, and interviews. At first he was shy, but over time he learned to speak in front of others. He practiced with Lena and his teachers, using slides and short phrases. Then came the day when he was asked to speak at a major educational conference, an event that brought together educators, doctors, and policymakers from across the country. It was a big stage. The room was full, but Oliver wasn't afraid. He walked calmly up to the microphone. He stood in front of hundreds of people, holding a small remote to change slides. He wore a suit jacket and a badge with his name. Behind him were photos of the chessboard, of his first tournament, of Lena. He explained his journey in simple but clear sentences. He told them about being misunderstood, ignored, and locked away. He spoke about chess, about learning, and about being treated like he didn't exist. Then he said a sentence that silenced the entire room. "I always knew what was happening. People just didn't know how to listen to me." The crowd didn't move. They didn't speak, and then they stood. The applause was long, loud, and emotional. In the front row, Charles and Lena cried openly. Not because they were sad, but because they saw what it all meant. Oliver wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving. He was teaching others. And most of all, he was being heard, really heard, for the first time in his life. After the event, the foundation received hundreds of messages. People shared stories, asked questions, and thanked them for giving children like Oliver a voice. The work had only just begun, but something important had already changed. Charles had learned how to be a father, not through money or control, but through listening and learning. Lena had gone from a cleaner to a national advocate because she simply paid attention to a boy when no one else did. And Oliver, he had gone from being locked in a quiet wing of a mansion to standing on a stage, teaching others how to see children like him. He was no longer a label, no longer a forgotten name on a medical report. He was respected, he was supported, and he was finally living the life he had always deserved. As he smiled and walked off the stage, the entire room stood again. This time, not just for the speech, but for everything Oliver had become. At age 13, Oliver stood at the airport with his suitcase in one hand and his passport in the other. He had been officially invited to represent his country in an international chess championship. The invitation came after years of tournaments, consistent progress, and recognition from national chess institutions. His name had begun to appear on ranking lists and articles, and coaches were impressed not only by his skill, but by the way he analyzed the game, patient, focused, and strategic. On this day, Oliver didn't seem nervous. He was dressed in a simple hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, and his expression was calm and excited at the same time. It wasn't just about the competition. It was about what it meant. He had been chosen for something big, not because of pity or sympathy, but because of his real ability. Around him stood Charles and Lena, both trying to stay strong and supportive, even though it was hard to let him go. Before heading to the boarding area, Oliver gave his father a quick but meaningful hug. Charles, once so distant, now wrapped his arms around his son and whispered, "I'm proud of you." Then Oliver turned to Lena. She smiled, and he walked over with a small laugh. He gave her the tightest hug and said, "Bye, Mummy." It was the same phrase they used to joke about years ago, back when chess was just between them. Lena didn't cry. She laughed and nodded, understanding perfectly. It wasn't goodbye. It was growth. It was his way of saying, "I'm ready." Charles looked away, trying to hold back tears, but his hands trembled. He couldn't believe this was the same boy who once lived in silence, ignored, and locked away. Now, Oliver was going to another country, speaking with confidence, competing with the best and doing it all independently. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. The announcement came over the speaker, and it was time for Oliver to board. He gave one last look back. Charles raised a hand in support, and Lena gave him a thumbs up. Oliver didn't hesitate. He walked confidently through the gate and disappeared into the corridor leading to the plane. Charles and Lena stood in place for a moment, watching the empty space he had just passed through. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Everything they had worked for, everything they had fought against, it had led to this moment. Oliver was no longer the boy the world tried to hide. He was now someone the world recognized, respected, and was excited to see. The airport around them continued its usual noise and movement, but for them, time had paused. Charles finally sat down, wiping his eyes. Lena placed a hand on his shoulder. "He's ready," she said quietly. Charles nodded, too emotional to speak. For once, everything felt exactly as it should be. On the plane, Oliver found his seat by the window and placed his bag on his lap. He buckled his seatbelt and pulled out a small notebook. It was one of Lena's old notebooks, the kind she always carried during the early days, filled with ideas, reminders, and things she wanted to remember about Oliver. She had given it to him the day before, saying he might find it helpful during the trip. Oliver flipped through the pages, smiling at her familiar handwriting. Most of the pages had notes about strategies, observations about his learning habits, and lists of things he liked. There were even old sketches of chess pieces and diagrams from when they first trained together. But what caught his attention was the first page. It was clean except for one sentence written in the center in bold letters. "One day, they will listen to you. Keep playing." Oliver stared at the sentence for a long time, then slowly closed the notebook. He rested his head against the window and thought about everything that had changed. He remembered the quiet rooms, the loneliness, and the drawings on the walls. He remembered Lena entering his life with kindness and patience, and how she never saw him as a problem. He thought about the day Charles watched him win a match for the first time. Every step had been hard, full of barriers and doubts, but he had made it through. Not because people taught him what to be, but because someone believed in who he already was. That belief had opened the path, and now it was his turn to walk it. He opened the notebook again and stared at that line one more time. Keep playing. It wasn't just about chess anymore. It was about living, growing, and never giving up on being heard. He smiled, not a nervous smile, but a strong, knowing one. As the plane took off, Oliver didn't feel afraid. He felt ready. The world was no longer a place that didn't understand him. It was now a place that waited for him. The tournament wasn't just a competition, it was a stage, and Oliver was prepared to take his seat at the table. Everything had changed. Now, when he walked into a room, people noticed. They asked questions. They listened to what he said and how he thought. He was no longer the silent boy behind a locked door. He was a speaker, a player, and someone who could lead. The world had finally opened its eyes, and it was watching him with interest. As clouds passed by outside the window, Oliver felt calm. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He just needed to be himself. That was enough. That had always been enough. He smiled again, notebook in hand, knowing that this was only the beginning of a new journey. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.